Before humans built cities, before empires rose and fell, the mind awakened. And the first thing it created was fear. In the flickering shadows of a cave, imagination stirred. Hands pressed into stone, markings left by ancestors who could see beyond the tangible. They drew creatures of half flesh, half spirit, born from curiosity and dread. The mind had learned to anticipate the unknown, to conjure threats before they appeared. Fear became the first teacher. Every rustle in the grass, every crack of a branch, every predator's eyes glowing in the dark was interpreted, analyzed, and remembered. Intelligence was not a gift, it was a weapon. It allowed humans to strategize, to deceive, to strike before being struck. With imagination came foresight. With foresight came planning. And with planning came the ability to dominate others. The first murders, the first wars, the first rituals, the first myths, all were born from the same crucible of thought and terror. The human mind could dream of gods and monsters, create stories that taught rules, justify actions, and manipulate behavior. It was capable of wonder, but equally capable of destruction. From the shadows of fear emerged creativity, but also violence. Every myth, every ritual, every moral rule, every conscience itself was shaped by survival. Humans did not invent these things to live more peacefully. They invented them to outthink, outmaneuver, and survive the threats that they imagined and those that were very real. This is the story of the mind that made humans the most dangerous species on Earth, not because of strength, but because of thought. Intelligence was never neutral. It was forged in fear, sharpened by survival, and wielded as a weapon.
Long before empires drew borders on maps, before kings and generals commanded armies, humanity discovered war. Not in grand campaigns, not in written chronicles, but in the simple, terrifying need to survive. Jebel Sahaba, a prehistoric cemetery along the Nile in Sudan, offers the earliest evidence of sustained conflict. A record of violence etched in bone, preserved for 13,000 years. 61 individuals lie buried there, men, women, and children alike. Many bear multiple injuries, arrowheads still lodged in bones, fractures from repeated blows, scars of battles that occurred over lifetimes. This was not a single violent incident. It was a series of attacks, an enduring struggle between groups, a war born not from ideology, but from fear. The first war emerged from necessity. Early humans were hunter-gatherers, moving through challenging landscapes, dependent on scarce resources, water, game, and fertile land. Contact with rival groups was inevitable. When territories overlapped, competition escalated into conflict. But these were not chaotic skirmishes. The injuries at Jebel Sahaba reveal strategy, premeditation, and an understanding of human behavior. Ambushes targeted individuals in motion. Attacks struck the vulnerable. Survivors carried the memory of assault, shaping social bonds and future decisions. From the earliest war, humans demonstrated that the mind could be as lethal as the sword or the spear. Intelligence amplified fear. Early humans could imagine threats before they appeared, foresee enemy tactics, and anticipate outcomes. This foresight transformed violence into organized aggression. It created strategies, enabled deception, and fostered collective coordination. Jebel Sahaba shows that even before the rise of civilization, humans were capable of planning over long timescales, of executing acts that required cooperation, observation, and calculation. War was not random. It was intentional, a manifestation of cognitive evolution applied to survival. The psychological dimensions are profound. Humans began dividing the world into in-groups and out-groups, forming the first tribal identities. Loyalty to one's group became essential. Suspicion and vigilance toward others became adaptive. This in-group versus out-group distinction forged early social cohesion while simultaneously justifying aggression toward outsiders. Intelligence, imagination, and fear intertwined to produce not only the capacity for violence, but the framework to rationalize it. The mind was weaponized at the communal scale. The material culture of Jebel Sahaba confirms this. Arrowheads were crafted with precision, designed to penetrate flesh and disable foes. Weapons were not mere tools. They were extensions of strategy, shaped to maximize effectiveness in hunting and combat. Violence spurred innovation, fostering foresight, coordination, and planning. Even small-scale conflicts demanded leadership, negotiation, and anticipation of enemy actions, laying the groundwork for early hierarchies and social structures. This first war also introduced the principle of collective memory. Survivors passed stories of attacks, strategies, and betrayal to younger generations. Oral tradition became a repository of knowledge about enemies and allies, terrains and tactics, morality and taboo. Myths, rituals, and cultural rules often encoded lessons learned in conflict, preparing communities for future threats. War became both a physical and psychological instrument, shaping behavior, belief systems, and social norms. In this context, intelligence revealed its dual nature. It could preserve life through cooperation, foresight, and social bonds, but it could also orchestrate destruction with precision and ruthlessness. Jebel Sahaba demonstrated that human cognition was capable of both remarkable adaptation and calculated cruelty. Warfare was not simply a response to need, it was an expression of the mind's capacity to manipulate reality, anticipate outcomes, and impose dominance. The emergence of war fundamentally reshaped humanity. Groups that could plan, strategize, and cooperate outlasted those who could not. Fear and foresight became engines of cultural evolution. Violence was no longer instinctual. It was cognitive, methodical, and purposeful. Intelligence created opportunities for both defense and aggression, and survival dependent on the ability to wield it effectively. From Jebel Sahaba onward, the patterns persist. Every organized conflict in human history, tribal raids, city-state battles, world wars, traces its roots to this earliest war. The mind that conceived of coordinated violence was the same mind that could build shelters, cultivate crops, and eventually create laws and religion. The shadow of Jebel Sahaba stretches across time. The First War was not a singular event, but a demonstration of the human brain's power to imagine threats, organize action, and assert dominance. Humans learned that intelligence could be lethal at scale. Strategy, planning, and foresight transformed survival into dominance. Violence was no longer purely reactive. It could be preemptive, calculated, and sustained. The First War illustrates the terrifying truth of human evolution, that the same mind capable of wonder and creativity could also orchestrate fear, control behavior, and command destruction. The legacy of Jebel Sahaba is clear. Intelligence was not neutral. It was a weapon. Fear, imagination, and strategy coalesced to form the blueprint of organized conflict. Humanity's capacity for war was born not from ideology or morality, but from the simple imperative to survive and dominate. In that crucible of the Nile Valley, the First War revealed that the human mind, awakened and dangerous, could reshape the world through thought as powerfully as through force.
Long before kingdoms, cities, or written laws, violence left its earliest mark on humanity. The first murder was not a story whispered in legend. It was etched in bone, deliberate and precise, a testament to the awakening of the human mind as both creator and destroyer. Archaeological evidence reveals one of the earliest and most chilling examples, the Talheim death pit in southern Germany, dating back 7,000 years. Within that mass grave lay 34 individuals, men, women, and children, slaughtered with brutal efficiency. Stone axes had crushed skulls from behind, Arrowheads pierced the flesh of the defenseless. Some victims bore signs of bound wrists, their final moments controlled by hands that understood the mechanics of death. There were no burial rites, no offerings, no time for grief. Only calculation, precision, and intention. The first murder was not an accident. It was a strategy. The attackers were not beasts. They were humans with foresight, with planning, with the ability to predict the reactions of others. Their victims were selected deliberately. Men capable of defending the village, women of reproductive potential, children who could one day become threats or resources. Every detail points to intelligence applied to destruction, an early demonstration that the mind could be a weapon as lethal as any sharpened stone. This capacity required imagination. To strike effectively, one had to anticipate fear, understand behavior, and exploit weakness. The perpetrators of the Talheim massacre displayed a theory of mind far beyond mere survival instinct. They imagined the intentions of their victims, predicted responses, and executed their plan with precision. In doing so, they revealed the first signs of human psychological sophistication, the ability to manipulate, deceive, and dominate. This was not chaos. This was cognition applied to annihilation. Intelligence in this context carried a dark promise. It allowed humans to foresee threats and create opportunities, to manipulate social bonds, and to plan aggression. The act of murder became a tool of strategy, a demonstration that thought could outmatch force alone. Talheim teaches that fear and foresight are inseparable. The human mind learned not only to imagine danger, but to become the danger itself. Survival required more than strength or numbers. It required cunning, calculation, and the ruthless application of knowledge. The psychological implications are profound. Early humans developed paranoia, not as pathology, but as adaptation. Trust became conditional. Alliances were fragile. Awareness of another's mind, the ability to predict intentions, was both a gift and a weapon. It enabled cooperation within groups in deception against others. Humans learned to hide motives, disguise emotions, and anticipate betrayal. Intelligence, for the first time, created both protection and peril. Murder at Talheim also reflects the beginnings of social strategy. Decisions were likely collective, guided by leaders who understood both terrain and human behavior. Violence was selective, organized, and goal-oriented, aimed at eliminating future threats. The mind could now calculate not only immediate survival, but long-term advantage. Territory, resources, and lineage became stakes in a psychological game played with lethal precision. Violence became anticipatory, premeditated, and methodical, a fundamental shift in how humans interacted. This first deliberate act of killing transformed the human mind. It demonstrated that intelligence was not neutral. It could serve destruction as readily as creation. Thought could protect or obliterate. Fear could instruct or dominate. And imagination, the same faculty that enabled art, ritual, and myth, was already weaponized, directing not only tools but intentions, shaping the destiny of communities and the course of evolution itself. Talheim is a mirror to the mind, a place where cognition and cruelty intertwined. It is the moment when humanity first realized that survival depended not only on physical strength, but on foresight, deception, and strategic aggression. The first murder marks the birth of conscious choice in violence, the deliberate application of intellect to harm, and the realization that intelligence could create the very dangers it sought to survive. The legacy of that first murder reverberates through history. It informs the evolution of strategy, the conduct of war, and the manipulation of social groups. The mind that killed at Talheim would later construct cities, invent law, and establish religion. But it would also calculate betrayal, orchestrate mass violence, and justify atrocities. Murder is the first proof that human intelligence was double-edged, a capacity for survival and creation,
and equally a capacity for destruction. The Talheim massacre teaches that the human mind is not inherently benevolent. Its gifts, planning, foresight, imagination, were as easily applied to annihilation as to protection. The first murder was not merely an act of violence. It was the first demonstration that intelligence could be wielded as a weapon. Fear sharpened the mind, imagination directed it, and intelligence made it lethal. From this point forward, humanity's greatest strengths would always carry the potential for its darkest acts. Survival was no longer a contest of strength alone. It had become a contest of strategy, calculation, and the deadly foresight of thought. Before written language, before organized religion, before structured morality, humans told stories. Stories were more than entertainment, they were tools of survival, instruments of influence, and weapons of the mind. Myths arose from the same crucible of fear, imagination, and intelligence that gave rise to murder, war, and ritual. They were the earliest way humans made sense of danger, imposed order on chaos, and taught lessons that transcended generations. The first myths did not simply explain the world, they shaped it, controlling perception, behavior, and belief. Cave paintings across Europe, from Chauvet to Lascaux, offer the earliest evidence of myth-making. Figures appear that are not merely animals or humans, but hybrids, creatures of imagination, half man, half beast, sometimes monstrous, sometimes divine. These images were not random. They conveyed meaning, warning, and instruction. A predator with human hands or a beast with human eyes could symbolize both threat and agency. These early narratives encoded morality, survival strategies, and social rules. They were the first scripts in which the mind influenced the mind of another. Myths served multiple purposes. They explained natural phenomena that early humans could not control: thunder as the voice of gods, eclipses as warnings from spirits, floods as punishment for transgression. They taught moral codes: do not steal, do not harm, respect the elders and the hunters, honor the rights. They reinforced group cohesion, defining who belonged and who did not. Myths controlled behavior subtly, through story rather than law, embedding lessons in imagination and emotion. The psychological impact of myths was profound. Humans could project fears, desires, and expectations onto imagined narratives. A story of spirits in the dark forest taught caution. A myth of a vengeful god encouraged obedience. By externalizing abstract dangers into stories, humans could anticipate threats, prepare for them, and enforce social norms. Myth-making was an early form of mind control, a cognitive tool that shaped thought and action long before laws or written rules existed. Burial practices further illustrate the power of myth. Graves with offerings, carefully placed bodies, and symbols suggest beliefs in an afterlife or spiritual journey. Myths extended beyond life and death, creating invisible structures of order and consequence. They prepared the living to act according to rules derived from imagined realities. Even in absence of immediate danger, humans internalize these lessons, allowing story to dictate action, behavior, and thought. Myths were also instruments of identity. They defined us and them, delineating insiders from outsiders. Shared narratives bound communities together, providing collective memory, shared fear, and shared awe. In a world of unpredictable predators and rival tribes, unity became survival. The stories that inspired caution, bravery, or loyalty were not neutral. They were shaped by the needs of groups, wielded to maintain cohesion and hierarchy. Intelligence allowed humans to craft these narratives deliberately, turning imagination into a strategic tool. The creation of myths demanded foresight and abstract thinking. Humans had to imagine events, agents, and consequences beyond immediate perception. They had to project fears into symbolic form, recognize patterns, and encode them in a format others could understand. This capacity marks a profound cognitive leap, the ability to externalize thought, influence others through story, and institutionalize fear and morality. Myths became templates for behavior, influencing choices and actions across generations. Stories also served as psychological rehearsal. By narrating dangers and imagining strategies to confront them, early humans practiced problem-solving in a risk-free environment. Myth allowed minds to explore scenarios that might otherwise be fatal. A tale of betrayal, a monster, or divine punishment became a mental laboratory where intelligence, caution, and social insight were exercised. Imagination, once the root of fear, became a mechanism for preparation and social control. Yet myths were double-edged. They were protective and instructive, but they could also justify violence, hierarchy, and manipulation. The same story that warned against danger could sanction aggression against outsiders or rivals. By codifying fear and authority into narrative, myths extended human power. Leaders, shamans, or elders could leverage these stories to control behavior, enforce norms, and manipulate perception. Intelligence, applied to imagination, became social weaponry.
Fear is the seed from which the first religions grew. Long before cities, before agriculture, before writing, humans confronted mysteries they could neither control nor explain. Lightning tearing the sky, storms swallowing villages, death arriving without warning. Hunger, disease, and the unpredictable movements of animals and rivers forced early humans to ask questions they could not answer. The mind, restless and creative, filled the void with invisible forces, spirits, and gods. Religion emerged not from morality, but from necessity. It was a tool to manage fear, impose order, and make sense of a world filled with danger. Göbekli Tepe, in southeastern Turkey, dating back 12,000 years, provides the earliest known evidence of organized religion. Towering T-shaped pillars, some more than 16 feet tall and weighing 20 tons, form circular enclosures carved with images of foxes, snakes, vultures, boars, and other creatures. There are no remains of daily life, no hearths, no homes, no tools. Only ritual. The site suggests that early humans could organize, cooperate, and commit immense energy to constructing sacred spaces before developing agriculture or permanent settlements. Religion came first, shaping social structures and community cohesion rather than following them. The significance of Göbekli Tepe lies not just in its architecture, but in the psychology it reveals. Humans were compelled to confront the unknown, to give it shape and name. Imagination became a survival tool. Ritual and symbolism allowed communities to externalize fear, creating stories and practices that imposed meaning on chaos. Lightning became a sign from the gods. Predators became agents of divine power. Disease became a message from spirits. These interpretations did not alleviate danger, but they gave humans the illusion of control. Religion also fostered cooperation on a scale previously unimaginable. Hundreds of people had to quarry massive stones, transport them over uneven terrain, and erect them with precision. This collective labor was made possible by shared belief. Shared belief in unseen forces allowed humans to suppress individual impulses, work together, and endure hardships that would have been insurmountable in isolation. Fear of the unknown was transformed into social cohesion, binding tribes through ritual, story, and shared awe. Yet religion carried a dual edge. The same beliefs that unify groups could justify aggression against outsiders. Deities and spirits became arbiters of social order, sanctioning violence against those who did not share the same narrative. Religious structures and myths encoded rules, prohibitions, and taboos, guiding behavior and shaping moral systems. Humans learned to wield belief as a tool, not only for comfort, but for control. The psychological impact of early religion is profound. Ritual offered a framework for understanding death, loss, and uncertainty. It reduced anxiety by imposing predictability. Symbols provided meaning where none existed.
Religion became a lens through which early humans interpreted the cosmos and their place within it. It was a cognitive adaptation, allowing the mind to manage fear, anticipate threats, and navigate complex social dynamics. Göbekli Tepe also demonstrates the mind's capacity for abstraction. Humans could conceive of forces beyond immediate perception and encode them in symbols. They could imagine the supernatural as an organizing principle. This ability to externalize thought into structures, stories, and objects was a turning point. Humans did not merely react to the world, they shaped it conceptually. Religion is the earliest example of humanity using imagination as both shield and weapon. From a survival perspective, religion was a strategy. It created norms that regulated behavior, reinforced alliances, and guided interactions. Shared belief reduced conflict within the group while justifying hostility toward outsiders. It was the first system in which the human mind manipulated perception, expectation, and social cohesion for practical ends. Intelligence, imagination, and fear coalesced into a structured framework that allowed humans to endure hardship and assert influence. Religion also became the incubator of morality. Rituals taught what was acceptable and unacceptable, instilled fear of consequences, and encouraged adherence to social rules. Yet the moral codes emerging from religion were not universal truths. They were constructs designed to maintain order, reduce anxiety, and maximize group survival. Conscience and morality were nurtured in this crucible of ritual and belief, forming the foundation for later ethical systems. Göbekli Tepe and sites like it remind us that religion preceded agriculture, cities, and civilization. Humans did not invent gods after they had stability, they built stability around their gods. Belief came before food, faith came before settlements. Fear drove imagination, imagination created ritual, and ritual became the architecture of social life. Humans were not merely worshippers, they were strategists, using the unseen to manage the tangible, the psychological to govern the physical. The first religions reveal a truth about human intelligence. It is both protective and dangerous. Religion protected by giving meaning to chaos, guiding behavior, and uniting groups. It was dangerous because it imposed belief, justified aggression, and enabled control over others. The mind, once capable of murder and war, now discovered a subtler form of influence. The same cognitive faculties that imagined threats and enemies could imagine gods, rituals, and cosmic order, and thereby extend the reach of human power into the moral and spiritual realms. Religion, then, is not merely a story of devotion, it is a story of cognition, strategy, and survival. It illustrates how fear shaped imagination and how imagination shaped society. Humans became architects of the invisible, constructing systems that regulated behavior, reduced anxiety, and prepared communities for both cooperation and conflict. Intelligence, once a tool for survival in the face of immediate danger, evolved into a weapon for social organization and psychological influence. The first religions were humanity's earliest laboratories of thought, where the mind, fear, and imagination intersected to create order, cohesion, and power. From the rituals of Göbekli Tepe to the pantheons of later civilizations, the pattern is clear. Human intelligence was never neutral. It was forged in fear, honed in strategy, and applied as a weapon, first in the act of survival, then in the shaping of society itself. Religion demonstrates that the mind could protect, manipulate, and dominate, laying the foundation for everything that followed: myths, laws, morality, and the conscience itself. The human mind, awakened, had become as formidable as it was creative, and nothing would ever be the same.
Conscience did not appear fully formed. It was not an innate gift handed down by evolution like opposable thumbs or language. It was a construct, a product of imagination, fear, and intelligence, working together to regulate behavior within increasingly complex social groups. As humans developed the capacity for self-awareness, they began to perceive themselves as agents within a web of relationships, actions, and consequences. With this self-reflection came guilt, shame, and the understanding of right and wrong, concepts designed not by morality itself, but by necessity. The birth of conscience coincided with the emergence of increasingly sophisticated social structures. Early humans were no longer solitary hunters. They were members of cooperative groups where survival depended on trust, reciprocity, and adherence to shared rules. Yet trust was fragile. Memory of betrayal, observation of aggression, and the capacity to predict intentions created an environment in which social cohesion required psychological mechanisms beyond instinct alone. Conscience emerged as a mental tool to navigate this landscape, a system to regulate behavior, anticipate social consequences, and internalize moral rules. Evidence of early moral cognition appears in both ritual and social practice. Burial rituals, the careful placement of the dead, and the offerings accompanying interment suggest awareness of ethical and spiritual frameworks. These acts were not merely symbolic. They reflect the early human mind's capacity to distinguish between actions considered right and wrong, to project consequences beyond immediate survival, and to imagine a social order extending beyond the self. Conscience allowed humans to internalize rules, anticipate judgment from others, and regulate impulses before action was taken. The psychological mechanics of conscience are profound. Self-awareness enabled humans to simulate the perspectives of others, to imagine how their actions would be perceived, and to feel guilt or pride based on anticipated social evaluation. Intelligence amplified this process. Humans could foresee the ramifications of lying, stealing, or harming a group member. Fear of social sanction, combined with imagination, created a mental framework in which moral behavior was advantageous. Conscience was adaptive. It stabilized communities, reduced conflict, and enhanced survival. Yet the same mind that created conscience also invented ways to manipulate it. Humans could feel guilt, but they could also exploit it in others. Leaders, shamans, and elders use moral codes to enforce obedience, control behavior, and justify actions. Intelligence allowed the invention of rituals, myths, and taboos that leveraged the conscience as a tool for social cohesion or domination. The capacity to break rules, deceive, or transgress with foresight was equally a product of the same cognitive evolution that produced moral awareness. Conscience, therefore, was both a stabilizer and the weapon, an instrument of both cooperation and control. The development of conscience marked a turning point in human evolution. Violence, war, and myth had demonstrated the destructive and influential power of the mind. Religion had codified fear and established social norms. Now, conscience internalized these lessons. Humans were capable of regulating themselves, anticipating consequences, and evaluating their behavior not merely in terms of survival, but in terms of social acceptability. Morality was no longer external alone. It became an internal guide, shaping thoughts, decisions, and relationships. This transformation had profound implications. The emergence of conscience enabled complex social structures, hierarchical systems, and collective cooperation. Groups with members capable of self-regulation and ethical foresight were more likely to survive and thrive. At the same time, the mind retained its capacity for cunning, deception, and manipulation. Guilt, shame, and moral reasoning could be used to inspire trust or to coerce, to build loyalty or enforce obedience. Intelligence, imagination, and conscience were now fully intertwined, creating a psychological architecture of extraordinary power. The birth of conscience illustrates that intelligence was never neutral. It was adaptive, strategic, and instrumental. Every moral judgment, every ethical reflection, every internalized rule emerged from the mind's need to survive in a social context. Humans could anticipate threats, predict responses, and adjust behavior accordingly. They could feel empathy, but they could also exploit it. The mind that created morality also created ways to subvert it, proving once again that intelligence is a tool, and the tool is only as benevolent as its wielder. Conscience also amplified self-awareness. Humans could now imagine themselves as moral agents capable of choice and reflection. This self-reflection expanded the mind's capacity to manipulate reality, to predict reactions, and to enforce social norms. Guilt became a guide, shaping thought and action. Moral imagination became a weapon, as humans used the internalization of rules to govern not only behavior, but perception, reputation, and influence. In essence, conscience was humanity's most sophisticated cognitive tool yet. It codified morality, stabilized groups, and regulated behavior. It extended the reach of imagination and intelligence into the domain of ethics, enabling humans to cooperate at scale while maintaining vigilance against betrayal. Yet it retained the same duality as all previous cognitive innovations. It could be used to protect, to unite, to inspire, and equally to manipulate, control, and dominate. The first conscience reveals a fundamental truth about the human mind, that intelligence is inherently strategic. Thought, imagination, and self-awareness evolved not for altruism alone, but for survival, cohesion, and advantage. Every moral impulse carries the potential for both good and harm, and every ethical reflection is intertwined with calculation. The birth of conscience marked the culmination of an evolutionary trajectory in which fear, imagination, and intelligence coalesced to create not only the capacity for violence, deception, and domination, but also the capacity for empathy, collaboration, and social order. Humans had learned to wield the mind itself as a tool, shaping behavior, regulating impulses, and enforcing norms. From the first murder to the first war, from religion to myth, and finally to conscience, intelligence had transformed from a survival mechanism into a cognitive arsenal, capable of reshaping reality both externally and internally. The mind had become the ultimate weapon, and conscience was its crowning refinement. The human mind is a paradox. It creates, it destroys, it imagines, it manipulates. Every tool we have ever crafted, every story we have ever told, every rule we have ever obeyed bears the mark of intelligence honed not merely to survive, but to dominate. From the first murder to the first war, from the earliest rituals to the myths that guided behavior, and finally to the birth of conscience, one truth emerges. The human mind did not evolve to be peaceful, it evolved to win. Fear was the crucible in which intelligence was forged. Before humans could build cities, invent agriculture, or write laws, they learned to anticipate threats. They imagined danger, predicted the actions of others, and prepared to act with foresight. Murder was not random, it was planned. Violence was not instinctual, it was calculated. Early humans transformed cognition into strategy, and strategy into survival. From Talheim to Jebel Sahaba, the evidence is clear. Intelligence and fear were inseparable. Fear taught foresight, foresight sharpened intelligence, intelligence weaponized fear. The first religions took this evolution further. Humans, confronted with the unknown, externalized threats into the supernatural. Göbekli Tepe, monumental and mysterious, demonstrated that fear could be harnessed into ritual, cooperation, and control. Religion imposed order, unified tribes, and codified morality. It provided psychological tools for managing uncertainty, but it also became a weapon.
Beliefs could justify violence, enforce obedience, and manipulate perception. Intelligence, imagination, and fear converged to create social power structures that extended beyond the immediate and tangible. Myths amplified the mind's reach. Stories of monsters, spirits, and divine retribution encoded lessons of survival, morality, and social cohesion. They prepared humans for danger, guided behavior, and reinforced tribal identity. Myths were more than narrative. They were early systems of influence, subtle instruments of control that leveraged imagination to shape action. Every tale was a cognitive tool, turning fear into guidance and compliance, anticipation into strategy, and morality into social enforcement. Conscience emerged as the mind's most sophisticated weapon. Self-awareness, moral reflection, and internalized rules allowed humans to regulate behavior, anticipate judgment, and navigate complex social systems. Yet the same faculties that created conscience could manipulate it. Guilt, shame, and morality could be harnessed to influence, coerce, and dominate. Intelligence had reached its apex. Humans could now govern not only the external world, but the inner world of thought itself. The pattern is undeniable. Every evolutionary advancement, from foresight to imagination, from ritual to myth, from morality to conscience, reveals a single principle. Intelligence was applied as a weapon. Every invention, every story, every law, and every moral code was a tool for survival, social cohesion, or influence. Violence was the first teacher, fear was its catalyst, imagination was the medium, and intelligence was the wielder. Humans learned to use their own minds as instruments of both creation and control. History bears the imprint of this cognitive trajectory. Empires rose through foresight and planning, justified by myths and religion, stabilized by conscience and moral codes. Wars were fought not only with weapons, but with strategy, propaganda, and psychological influence. Societies developed rituals, stories, and laws that enforced behavior, reduced uncertainty, and maintained hierarchy. Every structure, every belief, every system reflects the same principle first evident in prehistoric acts of violence and ritual. The human mind is a tool, and every tool can be a weapon. Understanding this reveals a deeper truth about humanity. Intelligence did not evolve for comfort. It did not evolve for altruism. It evolved for advantage. Survival depended on anticipation, manipulation, and the ability to shape perception. Cooperation existed alongside deception. Morality existed alongside violence. Fear existed alongside imagination. The duality of the mind, its capacity to create and destroy, has been with us since the beginning. To understand humanity is to understand that our greatest strengths carry the potential for our greatest dangers. The grand reveal, then, is not a single event, but a pattern spanning millennia. Talheim, Jebel Sahaba, Göbekli Tepe, cave myths, and the emergence of conscience all demonstrate the same principle. Intelligence, once awakened, became a weapon of survival. Every innovation, from tool to ritual, from myth to moral code, was forged in the crucible of fear and honed by necessity. The human mind is both marvel and menace, capable of extraordinary creativity and equally extraordinary destruction. As we examine history, the lesson is clear. Intelligence is neither benevolent nor inherently moral. It is strategic. It is adaptive. It is dangerous. Every act of creation carries the potential for manipulation. Every moral rule carries the potential for coercion. Every story carries the potential to shape thought and action. From the first murder to the birth of conscience, humanity's cognitive journey reveals that our greatest power, our intelligence, is also our most potent weapon. The human mind did not awaken to live peacefully. It awakened to survive, to dominate, to shape reality.
And in doing so, it created gods, monsters, rituals, laws, and conscience itself. Every step of this evolution reflects a singular truth. Fear, imagination, and intelligence are inseparable. Violence, religion, myth, and morality are manifestations of the same cognitive force. The grand reveal is that humans are dangerous not only because of what they do, but because of what they think. Intelligence, once awakened, became the ultimate weapon.
If intelligence made us dangerous in the beginning, it still does today. The same mind that learned to predict threats, anticipate betrayal, and wield the imagination as a weapon continues to shape the world. Technology, culture, law, and society are all extensions of that same cognitive power. Tools forged in fear, honed by strategy, and amplified by intelligence. We create systems, we tell stories, we invent rules, but always with the potential to manipulate, control, or destroy on a scale our ancestors could never have foreseen. The human mind is both marvel and menace. It built civilizations and destroyed them. It imagined gods and monsters, and it waged war in their names. It gave rise to morality, yet invented ways to subvert it. The trajectory of humanity is clear. Intelligence is never neutral. It is adaptive, strategic, and lethal when necessary. Every creation, every invention, every law and story is shaped by a mind evolved to survive first, to dominate second. The question that remains haunting is this: if intelligence once saved us, allowing our ancestors to survive against predators, rivals, and uncertainty, can it now threaten us in ways we cannot fully imagine? As we stand amid cities, machines, and global networks, we must confront the same duality that shaped our earliest ancestors, the same faculties that gave rise to cooperation, culture, and morality also carry the potential for manipulation, violence, and destruction on a scale our ancestors could never have foreseen. If fear and imagination made us dangerous once, they still do. The human mind, the ultimate weapon, shapes the world with every thought, every decision, every story we tell. And in the end, the greatest challenge may not be the threats around us, but the mind that created them, and the mind that must now learn to control itself.